The world of Batman Caped Crusader is a complex and nuanced series which expands the world of the Batman into our modern world. And while many people don't like it because of the gender bending or other shifts in the characters, I think we can all agree that this series is certainly emblematic of our modern world. So today, we're going to talk about noir and how, as a genre, noir is relevant to our modern times. Noir is a genre of storytelling that hasn't been popular since the 40s, but it's very visible in this series of Batman. It paints a bleak, often urban picture of a world filled with broken systems and broken people. A world which is almost uninhabitable for ordinary folks. But noir also shows us how to survive in that world, how to be good people in a world that is slipping into darkness. These are the lessons that we need in our world today. Before we get rolling, I just wanted to take a second and remind you all to like, subscribe, and comment if you can. Your engagement helps me so much. Now let's get back to the video. Batman's world has always been dark, but this one is especially dark. Despite being animated and relatively clean compared to the 2022 Batman movie, this is still not a world for children. It's toxic, corrupt, and dangerous for ordinary folks. It harkens back to the world of noir that was popular for so many years around the middle of the 20th century. Classic movies like The Big Sleep, The Maltese Falcon, Dark Passage, Notorious, Shadow of a Doubt, and so many more that came to define the darkness of the time. Most people don't think of that genre anymore because it was so long ago, but it was my absolute favorite when I was younger. The stories of a guy outside of the system in a world that was dark and corrupt, struggling to survive. I found these stories to be captivating. Perhaps because this genre was reclaimed by the now cult classic show Veronica Mars, which was one of my favorites in high school. Much like Batman, it follows a young detective, Veronica, a teenager growing up in a corrupt, ultra-wealthy town as she champions the working class members of her community, trying to get justice in a world where there is none. The show was neo-noir at its finest, and very much applicable to the Bush era when it came out. And this was a time when speaking out, having an opinion, seeking the truth, being different, these were all taboos that could get you in big trouble. Veronica, the cynical, hard-boiled detective, was unafraid, as she had lost everything that meant anything to her at the beginning of the series. Her world, and noir at large, paints a world of darkness. It's appropriate in many ways that the original genre came out in black and white, because there are few good people in noir. There are femme fatales, corrupt lawmen, cynical detectives, morally ambiguous and complex people making difficult choices in a world that is often economically unequal. Sound a bit like the Caped Crusader, or like modern times? Noir is a world where people don't always have good choices available to them, hence the moral ambiguity. They are often victims of broken systems and corruption, or just bad to the core. But this is also a world where decent people can reclaim their agency. It paints a world where good and bad are clearly defined by intention, if we can find our moral compass and sift through the shades of gray. And most importantly, forgive ourselves when we can't. As long as we never stop trying to be better and do the right thing no matter what, this is the role of the Batman. But what's interesting about this series is that in this world, he is a side character, not the main character. The cast is the protagonist, because in the world of noir, class matters. And being a rich kid automatically relegates Batman to the minority. He has more resources and abilities than 99% of Gotham. Bruce assaults a man for insulting his mother for wearing pearls in the wrong part of town, implying that she was responsible for her and her husband's untimely demise. He escapes the criminal justice system due to his wealth and status, but is ordered to therapy with one Dr. Harleen Quinzel. He goes and lies his way through therapy, because it is very obvious that this Bruce is wearing a mask. We learn little of his inner world in therapy, but through flashbacks, we see his trauma. He is not our favorite Batman of the 90s. He is not the doofy Bruce Wayne of Christopher Nolan's world. No. This Bat is even more deeply damaged. We see that while he is trying to be good, ultimately he is a traumatized rich kid trying to balance justice and vengeance. I know this has always been the case, but it seems as though the creators are even more blunt with it in this version. And I've watched a lot of Batman in my life. Batman is trying to use his privilege for good, but he is privileged. He's not friends with Alfred, calling him Pennyworth, never getting too personal with him. And though it's not clear how much of this is his desire not to get close to anyone because of his damage, or how much of it is his upbringing. He is a good man deep down, but he comes off pretty problematic. And even in the beginning of the show, his actions leave us to wonder, how much good is he really doing? As I said before, I've watched a lot of Batman. I grew up loving Batman, but when I got to college, I was really confronted with the idea that superheroes and the criminal justice system don't always make sense. When you study and learn about the roots of crime, it's difficult not to ask questions. Is it useful to beat muggers? Are all muggers and small-time criminals just jerks who enjoy hurting people? Are they struggling to make ends meet? Are they desperate or mentally ill? These aren't questions kids think to ask, so superhero shows work just fine for them. But as an adult, it's hard not to. This version of Batman tries to take all of that into account. This rogues gallery is filled with characters that represent the worst of our world. They are not victims of circumstance, but morally bankrupt individuals making choices for power, vengeance, or money, among other things. They are driven by broken ideals or strange circumstances, but they are making choices. It's strange that Noir isn't making more of a comeback. Many people want to compare Caped Crusader to Batman the Animated Series, and that's fair because Bruce Timm was the mind behind both, but he did what any good creative person does. He didn't rehash the past for a nostalgic cash grab. He made each Batman a product of its time. The Batman of our time is different from the Batman of the 90s, and it should be, as our time is radically different. This modern world of ours begs us to ask the question, can we do any good? Is the Batman good for anything anymore? In the age when we are all desperate for a social safety net, how useful is the criminal justice system, which consistently siphons off money from social programs? A government that does anything is automatically labeled communist or socialist. When the IRS was given proper funding, there was a freak out from at least a section of the government. You know who I'm talking about. But they just went after Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola was forced to cough up $6 billion in back taxes. It's indicative of a sentiment that is becoming more and more commonplace these days, that the government should take action to protect the people. Even in a world of choices and true villains, there are people who believe we need a clean government that is functional and will protect us. In fact, there's a daily newsletter called Letters from an American, in which a prominent historian lays out a summary of the daily news along with a historical perspective on the day's issues. She's made it very clear that the last 40 years of what she calls supply-side economics, you know, all the greatest hits, trickle-down economics, business deregulation, cutting taxes for the rich, etc., has debilitated America into our current state of unrest. She believes that creating a government that functions for the people, regulates business, and protects civil rights is what we need at this moment. She cites historical examples of how the government used to be this way a long time ago, and how it can be again. But we'll talk more about her later. It's just interesting to me that in the show there are so many references to unions, wealth inequality, government corruption, and more themes that have come up in Letters from an American's daily newsletter. Batman's world is a dark reflection of our world, enhancing shadows in an even deeper way. This Batman is insincere, and on his own journey to transform from a traumatized child to a healed man. He is nobody's savior, interested in punishing criminals above everything else. This world is decaying, filled with corruption and ruthlessness. The people are cowardly, entitled, and often rotten to the core. There is a moral line between good and bad in actions, but most people seem to be bad in at least some way. In the first episode, we meet the Penguin, Oswalda Cobblepot, a notorious crime boss who has been terrorizing Gotham. Of course, in the first episode, she's hosting a fundraiser for the police, and naturally, robbing them blind. She and Rupert Thorne, the other major crime boss in Gotham, are fighting for territory, and in the opening scene, she blows up his warehouse. Unfortunately, Thorne survives, because as we later learn, one of Mama Cobblepot's sons warned him in advance to be out of the way. In the end, neither Thorne nor Cobblepot protect the son. In fact, his idiocy gets his brother killed. In this world, Barbara Gordon is a public defender, who is able to help the Penguin's son. But rolling up the Penguin's operation means handing the rest of the city back to Rupert Thorne. From the very first episode, we are taught the core message of this series. The right thing is not the easy thing. I don't know about any of you, but I just couldn't get over how ridiculous the corruption is in Gotham. I mean, how does the Penguin get her hands on a long-range cannon? She is able to blow up the police station. The biggest change in the series, to me anyway, is not so much the gender or racial changes, but in that of Harvey Bullock's character. Rather than being an inept and bumbling but well-meaning idiot, he is a straight-up monster. But this corruption among the police is not that surprising given the sentiment towards the police among many people these days, as well as in the noir genre historically. It's not a question of whether the cops are or are not corrupt, but of this world as a dark reflection of our own, in which all institutions and people are corrupt. In this world, the cops seem useless, the same as the Batman in many ways, and they fall on the same scale that most people do. No one is purely good, just shades of gray. Even Thorne, who is a truly awful person, is just a man. At the end of the series, we see that he has a son that he wants to spend time with. In some cases, cops make things worse, such as in episode 4, when Flass and Bullock, the two most corrupt cops on the force, let a dangerous fire villain go to catch Batman. And they let him burn down a tenement building in the hopes of drawing him out and capturing him. It's a disaster, and they don't catch Batman. Of course, they can't let Firebug get caught, because then he would reveal that they let him go. So naturally, they push him out of the window of the building that he set on fire. A reporter happens to take a picture of Bullock pushing Firebug out, and the headline reads as follows: "So these corrupt cops are rewarded for their horrifying behavior. They get to keep their jobs, and even get a promotion, all because the situation was was misconstrued. This is something that seems commonplace in today's day and age as well. There are so many elements of modernity in this world. The poor are disregarded as pawns, the rise of unions, and the deep desire for a social safety net in the face of wealth gaps so large that the wealthy can get away with pretty much anything. And there is a mistrust of police and government as well as institutions at large. Of course, those with wealth and power are hated, and there is also a vein of spirituality and generational karma. The people are usually awful, with the villains being entitled, morally bankrupt, power-hungry, corrupt, insane, greedy, jealous. It's an even darker reflection of our times, with even the good people being complicated characters. Commissioner Gordon is the only cop in town who isn't bent, but he refuses to ever concede that his system might be problematic in ways other than just corruption. Even among those who are good, there is a kind of apathy, a jadedness that permeates them. We see this in the first episode, where Barbara explains to her father how she met the Batman. Batman, despite working with the police throughout the series and even protecting the Gordons, never becomes friends with them. And there are considerably more resources dedicated towards catching him than in the 90s series. He's never beloved by the people. Most just seem to think he's a vampire because of his costume. In this series, he's no savior. He's just another Dutch boy with his finger in the dam of corruption. Characters like Lucius, Barbara, Renee, the Batman, they're only good because they have decently calibrated moral guidance systems. They end up doing some questionable stuff throughout the series anyway. People struggle in this world. The second villain of the series, an actor named Basil Karlo, is an obvious callback to Boris Karloff, the famous character actor from the 20th century. He plays a man who is unable to let go of his obsession with his female co-star, or his obsession with fame, having been rejected from many movies due to his less than handsome face. When a cosmetic procedure to change his face goes horribly wrong, he decides to become the very villain that he plays on screen, because that is the easy thing to do. And that sets the tone for most of the characters in this world. They do what is easy, not what is right. One could argue that some of these characters are victims of circumstance, and some aren't. In most cases, though, they are people who are making bad choices, easy choices. And while this does challenge the notion that all criminals need help or are victims of circumstances, it's a complex gradation, from those who are pure evil to those who don't know how to rise above their situations. They choose the easy path every time, whether it be vengeance when their sense of justice is incensed, theft when their money is gone, or murder to cover up past sins, and so on. The only villain we might find ourselves rooting for is Harley Quinn. Her actions are disturbing, though, to say the least. She is a therapist who places her rich clients into an inpatient facility, where she tortures them until they give up their earthly possessions and money. But we are left to wonder, aren't the actions of her clients more disturbing than what she's doing? They're decimating the entire city with their issues. This is noir for sure, because how does entitlement, greed, and apathy stack up against torture, vengeance, and kidnapping? One set of actions is legal, and the others aren't. But is she really that bad? I'm playing devil's advocate. I think she's pretty bad. The frustrating thing is that rich men giving away their possessions doesn't solve the systemic problems that create poverty and other issues. It just makes her feel better after spending all day listening to these idiots whine about their stupid rich people problems. It's odd, though, that when she is tapped by the police to do a profile on Batman, she talks about his deep desire to punish criminals to make himself feel better. But she turns around and does the same thing. Although, when you meet the new version of Catwoman, it's hard not to hate the rich. In this world and ours, the wealthy are often checked out of reality, vapid, soulless, and utterly ridiculous. Catwoman is a bit of fun, but the fact that she gets off scot-free so many times before she's finally caught for good boggles the mind a bit. Harvey Dent is another character who chooses what's easy, but it's not clear if his accident hasn't damaged his mind in some way. He chooses to be on the lighter side of the grayscale, being good when it's easy, and looking the other way when it's easy. During his mayoral campaign, he's forced to take money from Thorne, but when he refuses to comply with Thorne's quid pro quo and let off a specific inmate, he finds himself taking a not-so-pleasant acid bath. Oh dear God, I sound like I'm in a noir film now. In fact, this scene feels very reminiscent of the first-person visuals that we see in Dark Passage. Anyway, Dent lets his circumstances get the best of him, getting lost in self-pity, jealousy, rage, all of the dark emotions that we all have and can be brought forward by a traumatic accident like this one. Rather than seeking help from a mental health professional, he spirals into paranoia and hate. No one can save him from himself, though Barbara does try. Bruce unfortunately has too much of an ulterior motive. He justifies his actions, but we all know he's wrong. Dent goes on to take his anger out at criminals. As the district attorney in the past, he must have wanted to hurt those who came through his courtroom. courtroom to release some of his rage at the broken criminal justice system. He snaps and hurts a lot of people before he's finally taken in. The commissioner agrees to help him out if he rolls on other corrupt people in the system. He's demoralized about the prospect, but agrees. Unfortunately, Thorne's men and Flass and Bullock take him out before he can be put in front of a judge. Often this world is excruciating, like pulling buckets of water out of the ocean trying to empty it. It highlights the importance of having grit while working in a broken system. It's not about what is easy and simplistic, bad guys and good guys, but the shades of darkness that make up the world. It's about bravery, not cowardice, not running away in the face of hard times, back to autocracies or the loyalism and aristocracies of the past. We made a commitment as a nation to democracy, and as broken and difficult as our system has become, we have to stick to it and keep going, because truly, there isn't anything else at this moment that can meet the challenges of the future. At the end, Batman makes an important point about pushing back against a bad world, and that is the grit we're talking about here.
The four of you can't hold back the tide.
I don't care. You will testify, Dent, because you don't bend with the world when it goes bad. You push back.
There is no world in which any of us are allowed to give up. Politically speaking, my favorite episode might be Night Ride, because it ties so well into what Letters from an American has been saying for quite a while now. The story follows a malevolent spirit, the Gentleman Ghost, who has been stealing from various people and groups in Gotham. Naturally, Batman doesn't believe it to be a ghost, but there isn't much else that makes sense. The mystery here is not the ghost, but the fact that he only steals from those who are poor. It turns out that in his life, this ghost was James Craddock, an aristocrat from a founding family of Gotham, who loved to gamble and squandered his family's fortune. He believed that wealth was his birthright because he was born an aristocrat. So when he lost his fortune, he blamed democracy and eventually became a highwayman, robbing from the poor and giving to himself. It speaks to the often spiritual dimension of our reality, much like episode 8 later on, but also to that of our living ancestors. Many people in America right now who are choosing to support anti-democratic norms. Some are older, some are just rich like the billionaire class, candidates from certain parties and certain people who espouse Project 25 and Agenda 47 as they attempt to gut democracy, just like this guy. There is certainly a dimension of generational karma here that is fascinating. The Ghost believes, just as many rich people do these days, that the ruling class is needed to assert itself over ordinary folks. It's the idea that the American founders rebelled against. This is a spiritual storyline, but it feels very rooted in our reality. The notion of Trump seeing himself as a king has been mentioned in the media many times, but the idea of a ruling class that wants a more traditional government is not something we talk about. In seeing the Gentleman Ghost, we can see how history is trying to repeat itself with modern billionaires taking the role of past aristocrats. It's a kind of karmic revenge of the loyalists during the American Revolution. They are no better than this crazy ghost, just power and money hungry, deeply entitled. Which is also kind of the point of my Citizen Kane video. If you're interested, I've linked it below. This conflict between those who believe in democracy and those who believe in autocracy is one that has been playing out throughout American history. The way that Letters from an American describes it, there are always people trying to roll back rights for everyone, and those who fight for them. Even in our modern times, when this conflict feels so pronounced, truly, it has been happening for the last 250 some odd years. The hatred of those with wealth and power, the emptiness of the universe. It paints a specific world. Noir as a genre could just be dismissed as stylized darkness, but I would argue that oftentimes it's a story of faith. In a world that is so dark, we learn to see. In a space where God and the universe fails us, we learn to believe in ourselves and each other. It's the belief that the darkness is not forever, because we have the power to affect change. Our good actions have more depth and impact in a dark world. I think it's interesting that people often ask, why does God let bad things happen? Shouldn't the world be perfect? Well, I think it's because bad things, hardship, they teach us to have faith in ourselves and each other. We are here in this world for a while, and difficult situations, things like crime, corruption, they spur us to action, to be good people, to care for each other and ourselves when God does not. There was an interesting scene from the 3rd season of Veronica Mars, wherein Veronica is roofied and nearly assaulted by the campus rapist. She is saved by her boyfriend and nursed back to health by her father, both of whom she was angry with because they had not lived up to her moral standards in different situations. Upon waking the next morning, she has a realization.
Situation like this, I think we all learned a valuable lesson about faith. You give it to the people you love, but the people who really deserve it are the ones who come through even when you don't love them enough.
The darkness of Noir also teaches us something else. That same grit that we talked about before. It's easy to give up, and I don't know why it seems so fashionable lately to resign oneself to fate. But the tide has been shifting in the last year or so. The world of Noir shows us how much conviction and grit lives within us that we don't even feel. It's the grit to keep pushing even when you lose, as Batman and his friends did at the end of this season. No matter how much we hate the world of Noir, the world of Batman, and our modern world today, we must admit the darkness gives life depth. Hardship gives life meaning, as painful as it is. Without shadows, a drawing is a flat piece of nonsense, and without darkness, life would be empty. It's up to us what we do with those dimensions. Do we succumb to the darkness like Flass and Bullock, becoming a part of it, losing our humanity in the shadows, or do we burn brighter in our zeal and passion to help others and become like Barbara Gordon or Renee Montoya? The clearest message of this series is that we do have a choice. In 2024, there is a bit of a sentiment among young people that criminals are not always fully responsible for their actions, and that jail isn't always the answer to crime. It's not because young people are all bleeding heart liberals or soft or pathetic or some other nonsense. It's because young people aren't always in control of their lives. Read the comments sometimes on any video that talks about why young people can't buy a house or income inequality among young folks, and you'll see that we're forced to live with roommates, parents, take jobs that are below our educational levels, work in demoralizing situations without work-life balance, and struggle in ways that we didn't think would be possible. In the episode Moving Target, we are forced to confront this question of circumstances versus choice point blank when a hit is placed on Commissioner Gordon and he's forced to run for his life. The commissioner firmly believes that people make choices and criminals are given the same choices as non-criminals. He tries to stay in Gotham to show people that he is unafraid of the assassins descending upon the city. Unfortunately, as things escalate, Barbara convinces him to leave so as not to harm those around him. As Barbara, the commissioner, and Montoya escape the city, they are attacked by assassins in a GCPD car. They hide out in a suburban development under construction, while Batman confronts the man who ordered the assassination. As the commissioner and his protective crew fight against the killers, we learn that the hit was for Barbara, not the commissioner. The order came from inside a prison, from a former client of hers who was dissatisfied with her representation. Barbara survives and confronts the inmate, who is indignant, believing firmly that he does not belong in prison. And this brings the resources, circumstances, choice, and morality questions to a head. In this case, this man is unrepentant and entitled. It's not unrealistic when we think about it, because many people are like this these days. We are still left with questions about the criminal justice system as a whole, but the story makes it clear that there are some people who do belong in jail, or at least somewhere far away from decent folks. Now, my editor did point out something to me, that it's a bit strange that a man who had a public defender like Barbara would suddenly have enough money to put out a hit from prison, but maybe he came into money while in prison from the death of a rich uncle or something. Rather than asking for an appeal or getting a new lawyer, he decides revenge is the answer. I'm not sure. Or maybe this episode is pure propaganda. Draw your own conclusions. I cannot claim to know everything. This world is dark, but thankfully the real world isn't this bad. We see this in episode 8, when a young woman with a vampire-like affliction nearly murders several children by sucking their energy away. Another child helps Batman to knock her out until the sun comes out, which could potentially kill her. The child here wants to leave the vampire girl for dead, because she firmly believes Batman shouldn't help her. She's a bad person, but Batman helps her anyway, because she is truly a victim of her circumstances. Born with an uncontrollable affliction, an immature child with no parents to care for her, and no methods to cope with her condition, Batman shows compassion, because the morality of children is not the morality that we should run the world by. This is what makes Batman good in this world. The world of Batman, Caped Crusader, is incredibly complex, with conflicting ideas existing together. It's very much in the shadow of a 90s series, but I think it measures up. The show feels strangely good, the same way that the animated series did. It puts away most of the complex questions we have about society right now and paints a clear way forward. It's comforting in a time when it feels like society itself is wrapped up in analysis paralysis. Intentions determine who is good and who isn't, and all that matters is making a better world. Batman tries to effect systemic change, but he's not great at it. His lawyer Lucius is doing things that make sense, investing his money properly to help build communities for those who need help. Batman is doing good, but he's kind of doing it selfishly. His motives are just like Harley's, except he believes in the system. However, he's still rich and not perfect. In Moving Target, we see his Wayne Gardens development. Frankly, when Lucius asks him if he wants to invest in the project he's investing in, Bruce says no, but he's building a housing project already, just for the wealthy? Bruce claims that the money that Lucius wants him to invest in his low-income housing project is his discretionary fund, and that Lucius shouldn't ask what he uses it for. But frankly, instead of using that money for Batman work, Bruce should invest it with Lucius, because logically, that would help crime and corruption in Gotham. Lucius admonishes Bruce that he should treat the staff like people. Bruce knows very little about Alfred, the man who raised him. In modern times, it seems so commonplace to shut down emotionally. This story is a very different story of Batman. It's more about his transformation than it is about him doing good. I think for some people, this show was always going to be a bit disappointing because it reminds us that it's not the 90s anymore. The creative experimentation and brilliance of the original series just isn't possible in the modern media and business landscape. But the stories they tell and the world that has been created is great by modern standards because it meets the challenges of modern times. It stays true to the spirit of the Bat, of hope, faith, and grit in the face of hardship, of doing the right thing, not the easy thing, and that through discipline, courage, and teamwork, perhaps we too can affect change. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, you should check out some of my other videos. If you would like to watch something serious, you can check out my video on Elon Musk and his stories comparisons to that of Citizen Kane. But if you'd like something light and fluffy, then you can check out my video on Digimon and the hope for the digital future. Either way, I hope you enjoy them. See you in the next one. Bye!